Europe has a reputation for having some of the highest tax rates in the world. And while that's often true, there are more than a dozen countries and territories where you can move and enjoy some of the lowest tax rates in the world. Today I'm going to share with you some of the lowest tax countries in Europe. And here's the thing I always tell you. Look beyond the headline tax rate. People often go to places like Dubai because they hear zero tax, zero tax, zero tax, zero tax. And that's true. It was never true for dividend income from foreign countries or certain royalty incomes. Now it's not true even for companies that the average person has in the UAE. So it's not zero tax anymore. It never was entirely zero tax. But that was the reputation, and people follow reputations. European countries sometimes have a big sign on the wall, 50% tax, and yet there's exceptions for certain people. You can get multi-year deals. You can pay only on certain parts of your income. So let's go through the list. There are some places in Europe that actually just have pretty low taxes. One of them that a lot of nomads go to is Bulgaria. It is a bit more conservative. It's a low-cost place to live, and they have a 10% tax rate. Now, anything in Europe where you set up your company in Europe, it's going to be a bit more work than going to a place that just has a very straightforward, 0% tax rate. There are going to be more forms to fill out. There is more due diligence and all kinds of stuff. It's Europe. That's how the European Union works. But Bulgaria has some of the lowest tax rates. At the corporate level, so does Hungary. And so that brings up the question, what kind of business do you run? How do you want to take your money out? Are you reinvesting all the company's money, or do you just take it out as a dividend? And so these are the kinds of things that we help our clients figure out, because the answer to that question may dramatically change where it is that you actually want to live based on how you use your money. One more country with a very low tax rate in Europe is North Macedonia. I don't see how that's going to be better to live in than Bulgaria or some of the other countries we're going to get into, but they have a very low basic tax rate. Montenegro would have been under 10% up until recently, but they raised their tax rates a little bit as well. Both of those in the Balkans. Estonia and Georgia have this model where if you reinvest the money, you don't pay tax until you take it out, so you basically just keep compounding it. That's worth it unless you're someone who runs a high margin consulting or other kind of business, and you're just used to taking your money out and going out and buying real estate or investing it yourself. Those people would go to different types of countries. And if you're an American and you have restrictions on what you can do with the money in your company in order to achieve significant tax savings overseas, well, that's an extra layer. So if you're struggling with this, you can go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. This is what we help our clients figure out. All the different pieces of the puzzle to where you actually lower your tax rate as much as possible in a place that you actually want to live. Because there's many different elements from where you're from, how you live, the type of income that's involved. Those are all things that have to be considered. We can help you figure it out. So those are the actual low rate places. Let's talk about the next type of tax savings, and these are the so-called lump sum regimes. This is often for foreigners, although not necessarily. And it's where you come in and you say, all right, listen, I'm going to pay you X amount of money every year. It could be in perpetuity or it could be for a certain number of years, 15 years, for example. And whatever I earn, that's what I earn, and you get this amount. It's a fixed amount. Now, in many cases, if you don't earn enough to justify paying the lump sum, if things totally fall apart, you can always flip over to the regular system, or you can just leave the country. Now, that may mean you can't come back and rejoin the lump sum regime again for a while. But where can you do this? Well, Poland has a newer regime. You're going to pay 50 to 60,000 euros a year, depending on exchange rates. And the cool thing is, you can work towards citizenship in a country like Poland. Greece has a regime. What Greece wants to do is they want you to buy real estate. Italy has a regime. It was 100,000 euros for a long time. Now it's 200,000 euros. So they realized, hey, we got a good thing going here. People want to live in Italy, but they don't want to pay the crazy Italian taxes, 200,000 euros. Switzerland has had this. They were the one everyone thinks about when they think about lump sum taxes. Not every Swiss canton has it, so you can't live in Zurich. But you could live in Lucerne, you could live in Geneva, the French-speaking part of Switzerland. Obviously, the teeny tiny little cantons that are rather rural, they will generally have that. And so you can set up in Switzerland. And so what's cool about those countries is not only can you work towards citizenship? But listen, you can become Swiss and then say, I want to live somewhere else now, and you can go to a different tax-friendly country. But basically what you can do is you can say, all right, hey, I'm going to set up my company somewhere else, and if I make $3 million this year and I pay Italy 200,000 euros, I'm basically going to pay a 6 or 7% tax rate on that money. And so the more you make, the lower the tax rate gets. They get more money than they would get from the average taxpayer, so they're winning, and you get a great tax rate. Now you've got some smaller jurisdictions that have variations of this. So for someone who's willing to pay something, and again, the more you make, the better the rate gets, because it's not tied to what you make, it's just tied to, hey, here's an amount we'd love to get from someone. Whoever wants to come and pay this amount, come on in. Switzerland's a bit different in that each of the cantons has their own deal. There's a formula. What's actually interesting about Switzerland is we've had clients who get Malta citizenship, which you can get in about 15 to 18 months through a donation program. It costs about $1 million. And once you're Maltese, now you can go into Switzerland as a European, and because you don't need a residence permit, your tax contribution gets cut in half. So if you're American, Canadian, Australian, Brazilian, whatever, and you don't have the right to live in Switzerland as a European, you can obtain that right, and then you're cutting the bill. And let's say that you're going to go to a canton where it's $400,000 a year in lump sum tax, but a European would only pay $200,000 a year. Well, that $1 million citizenship, you pay it back in 5 years, and now you have a European citizenship. That if you're American, for example, maybe you decide, hey, I'm a Maltese person living in Switzerland. I'm going to make my life easier. I'm going to drop the American part. Maltese citizens can travel just as many places as Americans can. Plus, I have the right to live in any of these European countries, so what do I need the US part for? Or, hey, I'm Canadian, and if Justin Trudeau does something stupid one day and tries to take my money when I'm not living in his country, I can always say, here's your passport back, Justin. You've also got, tax-friendly islands, for example, like the Canary Islands, Madeira. Those are pretty tax-friendly in Europe. The next type of tax-friendly country in Europe is a non-dom program. This is where you're not domiciled. It's often related to where's your father from, where do you call your domicile, or where do you plan to be buried, for example. There's a number of criteria. It's a bit of an old school system, I would say. The UK recently canceled their program. Ireland still has their program, more modeled off of the more difficult British system, but it's a functional system. You can live in Ireland, you can work towards citizenship, and basically the money that you bring into Ireland is taxed at high rates. But again, if you're making $3 million a year and you're living in Ireland on 500,000 euros a year, then 500,000 gets taxed. And so you're basically paying what's called half, but only of 1/6, give or take, of your income. So half of 1/6 is about 8%. There's your tax rate. And again, they're getting money from you, more money than from the average person in many cases. There are ways that you can actually set aside money that you have before you go, and you can potentially have much lower tax for some time. Now again, if you're not European, you're going to need to get a residence permit, and there may be some tax planning around that in the European countries where, how do you get that residence permit? Are you working in a business? Do you need to get an employment permit? If you're employed, do you need to pay tax on that? Understand about Europe, there are rules. The rules are enforced. We recommend following the rules. So, especially in a European Union country, you can get low tax, but you don't want to play games on, I'm just, I'm working, but how do they know? Don't do that. If you want to be in Europe, there are more rules that come with it, but you can pay 8% tax in English-speaking developed countries. Among others, Malta has a program. It's a bit more flexible. Cyprus has a program. They've talked about citizenship in as little as 3 years for folks. And not directly called a non-dom program, but Spain has their Beckham law. That's more time-limited than some of these other programs. But as one of my colleagues here says, if you're coming from a Latin American country or the Philippines, you can qualify to apply for Spanish citizenship after 2 years of residence, and then you gotta hang around while they process your application. That'll take a couple more years. But in the window of tax friendliness you have, you could become a Spanish citizen. And then again, now you got, rather than spending $1 million in Malta for their passport, you can just move to Switzerland and take advantage now as a Spanish citizen. Right? So every country plays a different role here. Malta has a non-dom tax regime. You don't have to be Maltese or even European to take advantage of that. Malta separately has a roughly $1 million donation to, if you want to get Maltese citizenship, upon which time you can live in Malta, But most people would choose just to travel the world with a top tier A passport, or they would move to Switzerland and say, hey, I'm not Canadian anymore, I'm European now, give me half the tax rate. And so then there are flexible tax regimes. This just may be, we don't have so many rules about our tax code. So Serbia, for example, more flexible on what counts as the kind of income they include for tax purposes. Montenegro, to a certain extent, has that. So one thing you'll see talked about is like CFC rules, controlled foreign corporation rules. These are the rules that make it to where you can't just live in the United States, set up your company in the British Virgin Islands, and then just not pay any tax, because you are the owner of the company. You're the one benefiting from the company. Therefore, that just gets added to your bill. Right? Now, there's plenty of reasons to have offshore companies, offshore trusts that are tax neutral. They don't add to your tax, but you still pay the tax where you live for asset protection purposes, for structuring. You have to do it to own certain assets. You can buy offshore stuff, whatever. But if you live in a high tax Western country, setting up your company offshore is not just going to magically reduce your tax bill. And so some countries, they're not part of the European Union, so they're just like, they don't really get around to that. Those are kind of the countries that you're looking for, countries that are smaller, countries that want to be competitive. Now, obviously, Italy and Greece, these are not small countries. Poland's not a small country. I would imagine Italy has realized, hey, we don't have enough money around here. Bring some rich people in. If they can pay, all right, fine, we'll make it easier for them. But a lot of these small countries, they're not drunk on the power that the legacy brand countries have had. Their goal has never been to try and extract every cent from you. They're not nearly as organized. And you know what? I believe that if you live in a Western legacy brand country, you got to follow the law, you got to pay every cent of taxes that you owe. But I also believe that if other countries want to offer a different system, and you have a legal way to get out of the system that you're in and get into the new system that you like better, nothing wrong with that either. That's what we help people do. We talk about this stuff every year at our annual event, Nomad Capitalist Live. We have a system we've put in place that is constantly trawling the internet, looking for everything from corporate tax rate changes in Indonesia to new residence permit options in Estonia. And we have a human team of 7 people at this point who are doing human research and development, building relationships, finding new opportunities, and figuring out all the minutia of these different programs. Because when you go to Europe, there's going to be some minutia. Ireland, for example, one thing stands out. Your foreign investments are generally not included for tax purposes. However, there are certain ETFs and REITs that may be included for tax purposes under certain conditions. However, there's a way that you can exclude them if you structure it properly before you move there. The average person wouldn't be aware of that in an already complicated, tax setup. That's the kind of stuff we sit around figuring out all day. So if you're looking to move to Europe, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. We don't have just one option. We help our clients figure out from all the options. Now, there's certain ones that we like a bit more than others, and we'll tell you why as a client. But we will help you figure out from the dozens of countries, not just in Europe, but also in Latin America, also in Asia, also in the Middle East, occasionally also in Africa. How do you set up your affairs? And it's not just move to Europe and pay less. There's a lot of things that get factored in. And again, one reason people want to move to Europe is Poland, Italy, Switzerland, potentially the UK, Ireland for sure, Cyprus, Spain, maybe Serbia, maybe Bulgaria. You can get citizenships from these countries by living there. And so sometimes, rather than moving to the zero tax place, it's worth going somewhere and paying 8% or 50 grand or 100 grand. Because if you don't need that European passport now, why not just pay 50 or 100,000 euros of tax every year? You have to live somewhere anyway. And then you save yourself the $1 million of getting that Malta passport by donation. And then after that, if you decide to go somewhere else, you can. Now in Ireland's case, they kind of want you to stick around, but you get my point. Like, all these things need to be factored in. Sometimes the cost of zero tax is higher than the cost of 5% tax. And that's the kind of stuff we help our clients with. If you want to learn more about that, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. We'd be happy to help you. We also host the world's biggest and best event for global citizens. It's called Nomad Capitalist Live. That's 4 days where we do a deeper dive in this kind of stuff, and you get to hang out with people who are actually living in a lot of these places and hear their real experience. Now, the one country in Europe that is truly a territorial tax regime is the country of Georgia. We've talked about this for years. Georgia potentially could be a 0% tax country for people who bring a foreign business. Now again, with territorial countries, that means money you earn outside of their territory isn't included for tax purposes. It's not taxed. You want to look at how your business runs, what your involvement is in your business, should you be taxed as an employee. There's also a 1% freelancer regime. Now you can't make unlimited amounts of money, but you have a couple of these in that part of the world. Armenia has kind of sort of similar regime for certain kinds of companies, like with IT, where you pay a low tax. A lot of countries have that for IT. But Georgia, you can bring your own freelance business, you can pay 1%. And so that's the one territorial tax country in Europe. This is how to live like a king in Madrid.